I catch Givenchy. Got a new white bag and it coming full speed. And they see me at the top, now they really like me. Gotta move like that when you real ice. Cause it's way less friends than the haters. Way less hands when you make it. And it's really all in when you all in the...
Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday and welcome to Blue Talk. I hope you like the new intro music. That was pretty fire. I like the team that was responsible for that. But once again, welcome to Blue Talk, where we talk about politics, culture, and just everything happening in the world. I'm very excited to be here with some of my great and valued guests. Joe, Andre, and Keisha. Welcome to Blue Talk once again. Happy to have you. Before we get started, just a quick, tell me about your week. How's it been going, Joe?
Voter suppression in Georgia definitely hogging up a lot of my attention right now. But on the bright side, the corporate pressure campaign built up by a couple of the orgs down there is definitely starting to, shake the walls a little bit. So, down and up, a little bit of, best of times, worst of times, little Dickens for you,
Dickens, Charles Dickens. I love that. That's what's up. Miss Keisha, how's it going with you?
It's been kind of hectic. I just came off of a trip from Vegas, and I've just been trying to stay on top of school and everything still as we come to a close of the semester.
Definitely. All right. Well, good luck with staying on top of school. I hope you had fun in Vegas. Andre, how you doing?
I'm all right. I had some blood work done today. I went to Quest Diagnostics, and the guy couldn't find a vein on one arm, so that was enjoyable. But I was just thinking to myself, no matter how bad of a week I had, like I'm not the guy who stuck a ship in the Suez Canal. Like that guy's having the worst week of it. That the captain of that ship, he no matter how bad it is for me, I'm not that guy.
That's funny. That's funny.
Right. I didn't cost the world $1 billion trillion or whatever.
It's tough. Lucky they didn't release his name.
Right.
We have Maceo here, but I think he's having some technical difficulties. So I'll just go into my week. I've had a great week. I'm a big Laker fan. We signed Andre Drummond. We're about to win our second title in a row, and I'm super happy about that. But we don't have to talk about that right now. There's a lot more pressing issues to talk about in the world, one of which
we can talk about that more if we need to, Jalen.
I would love to talk about it. I got Kobe right there if you could see him. But I would love to talk about it. But before that, one of the biggest pieces of news for this week, something a lot of people are paying attention to, I'm sure you guys are paying attention to, is the trial of Derek Chauvin. He is the man who murdered George Floyd, even though they don't want to call it that yet.
Thank you.
But nevertheless, it's been a crazy week. It's been 10 months since George Floyd was murdered, May 25th, 2020, and the trial just started this week. Before we get into discussion on it, I'm just going to play for you guys a quick video of the key moments from day one of the trial.
You will learn what happened in that 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The most important numbers you will hear in this trial are 929. May 25th of 2020, Mr. Derek Chauvin betrayed this badge when he used excessive and unreasonable force upon the body of Mr. George Floyd. You will learn that he was well aware that Mr. Floyd was unarmed, that Mr. Floyd had not threatened anyone, that Mr. Floyd was in handcuffs. He was completely in the control of the police. He was defenseless. We're going to ask at the end of this case that you find Mr. Chauvin guilty for his excessive use of force against George Floyd. That was an assault that contributed to taking his life, and for engaging in eminently dangerous behavior, putting the knee on the neck, the knee on the back for 9 minutes and 29 seconds without regard for Mr. Floyd's life. We're going to ask that you find him guilty of murder in the second degree, murder in the third degree, and second degree manslaughter.
And this will ultimately be another significant battle in this trial. What was Mr. Floyd's actual cause of death? The evidence will show that Mr. Floyd died of a cardiac arrhythmia that occurred as a result of hypertension, his coronary disease, the ingestion of methamphetamine and fentanyl, and the adrenaline flowing through his.
We're having a little bit of trouble with the audio right now, but basically what the defense is
referred to as the telltale signs of asphyxiation. There were no bruises to Mr. Floyd's neck, either on his skin or after peeling his skin back to the muscles beneath.
Yeah, I think, the technical difficulties.
No worries. We're having a few technical difficulties just with the audio, but to recap what the defense is saying, pretty much that George Floyd did not die of a knee to the neck or being strangled. He died of previous health conditions and intoxication of some sort. I have a pretty good sense of how everyone in the room feels about it, but just to get into it, I'm curious, just what are your thoughts on this trial so far and what you've heard and maybe seen on social media or from watching it yourself? Just tell me your initial thoughts. We can start like that. Andre, let's start with you because you held it down with the audio.
So initially, I think that I'm in like a feedback bubble or a feedback loop where a lot of the people I talk to and the information that I get is from people who share similar worldviews as I do and believe in the same things. So I took some time to step out of my own bubble and engage with some folks who I think don't think the same way that I do and see the world differently than I do. And they were shaped. I thought a lot of their opinions were shaped by watching the video of the entirety of the interaction. And I think it made them less empathetic for Mr. Floyd's murder. And that's outside of my thought bubble. And that was some of the immediate reactions that I've gotten from those folks. But in my thought bubble, everyone I think is doing a good job on calling it murder, on switching the frame from it being, George Floyd's trial to being Chauvin's trial, which I think is a critical and important difference. I think there were some really compelling and moving moments from some of the witnesses, especially the clerk who had initiated, I think, the interaction. I thought his testimony was particularly heartfelt and sad.
Yeah, that's real. And you mentioned that a lot of people who don't necessarily share your same worldview, that part of it was that they watched the video in full. I'm going to ask Keisha her thoughts next, but I'm just curious, have any of you watched the video in full yet? I know that I have not.
I have not either.
Okay, Andre, have you watched it in full?
I've watched the majority of it, almost all of it in full, yes.
Okay, what about you, Joe?
Yeah, I've seen all of it.
Definitely. Okay, so Keisha, what were your initial thoughts on just the trial?
Okay, so basically, if this was a Caucasian male on the other end in George Floyd's position, there would be no need to prove that it was a murder. There will be no background information coming from the offense that suggests that it was the opposite person's fault. I see it as a murder, of course, and me coming from African American background, I believe that with the forefront of situations, we are automatically denied a lot of platforms. I would say that the Caucasian male or female may be suggested to, I would say, in that situation, because it's just completely unfair in my opinion.
Definitely. I definitely feel that. Joe, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I thought I was gonna agree with most of this call, but I already found something I don't agree with. So
okay, we love that.
I'll just go ahead and point on that. So I think if this was a white person, I don't think we would even talk about it. And I think that could inflame some of the same people that Andre may have spoken to this week too, right? Like the irony of the fact that maybe if this was a white guy, it may not have risen to the same level of media scrutiny. I just want to draw that point. But overall, I mean, I've seen the entire video. It's the most disgusting thing I think I've ever witnessed in my life. Just watching it, there's something visceral about the way that George is killed and how like close it is, and the fact that like we've seen people get shot before, but there's something else triggering about the fact that we see him like literally like asphyxiated. And there's something more like brutal about that. That I think is kind of hard. It's hard to distance yourself from, or to distance yourself from that empathy. And I think from either side. I don't know if there's a big difference between seeing the 8 minutes and 46 seconds or seeing the whole 9:29. I think any amount of time that led to his death is probably just horrific, right?
Yeah.
But I do think it would have been different if it was a white dude.
Definitely. So one thing the prosecutor pointed out, I think probably in the first two sentences, was the number 929. So I know that Joe and Andre, you guys watched the video. Keisha and I did not. I'm curious, Keisha, could you just share why you haven't watched the video?
Absolutely. I refuse to watch it because, for one, it should have never taken place. For two, I have actually the whole situation with and this is kind of off topic but related to the situation with hold on, I'm trying to think of his name now. And I just had it. The boy that got shot,
Tamir
who's
Rice.
wearing the hoodies for him.
Oh,
Trayvon Martin. Okay, yes, that's what I was trying to say. I feel like this is somewhat of a revisited situation, Sandra Bland type, same thing, and I'm honestly sick of it. I've actually been conversating with some of my peers, and they've said it was actually a horrific scene as well, and I don't want to see it. Just the same as if it was a famous African American influencer. He was asked the question, and the question was, "Are you happy about Black History Month?" And he just responded that no, because there's no White History Month, and so on. So why would we subject ourselves to a single month? So I'm saying that, and how that ties into any of this is we're constantly sold on settling for the less, settling for the bare minimum of explanation. And I agree. This should not, with Andre, this should not have been a George Floyd case. As it has turned over into the situation, like it should just be seen as what it is, not find underlying issues that it could be possibly potentially related to.
Definitely.
I wanted to touch base on something Joe had said about if this was a white person, we wouldn't have the same reaction. Joe, can you tell me why?
Gosh, Andre. Well, I think it's for the same reason that when an unarmed Black man is shot who doesn't rise to national to that national level of kind of consciousness, I think it's for that same reason. I think there are people who decide whose deaths are I hate to say this, Andre, are marketable. I don't think white death at the hands of police is, I hate to say it like this, but it's not marketable.
So I agree with the premise it's how we get there. I think, or why we got there is I think really important here. So I think that if George Floyd had been a white person, we wouldn't even be talking about it right now, right? But the reason that is because had George Floyd been a white person, the police officer who killed him would have been held responsible. That would have happened without a doubt, right? Justice, whatever that means, would have been served. So the reason it wouldn't have garnered national attention, in my opinion, is because there would be no need. The only reason we have to give it national attention is because that's all we got, right? Like justice is rarely served to the Black community. So we gotta, you know what I mean? We gotta organize marches and boycott and bring noise, because noise is what we got. And so again, I reach the same premises. I think if it was a white person, I think we wouldn't have been talking about it in the same way, because that police officer would have been fired immediately. He would have been tried, and he would be in prison right now.
Yeah. So kind of off of that, I think that as African Americans, as Black people, we have experienced for centuries injustice by the police and the criminal justice system. One thing that you hear a lot, especially since the death of Trayvon Martin, or the murder of Trayvon Martin, rather, is the impact social media has had on these movements. A lot of people will say that this is something that's been happening forever. Now we just get to see it in social media. When Joe was talking about the different factors that led to this, there is a criminal justice factor, there is a police factor, there is a media factor, there is a social media factor. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on how do you think social media is playing a role in these movements? How do you think social media may have amplified the situation with George Floyd? And do you think, as a Black person on social media, that being constantly exposed to this stuff is a net positive or a net negative?
Okay, so I'll start with the movement for Black Lives, and I mean that kind of like its overarching movement. Like Emmett Till didn't need social media for his image to become like viral, right? So I'm not sure social media is necessary, but I do think that I think it's the net negative is that we're becoming desensitized to it. We're becoming desensitized to the destruction of Black bodies. And I think that's the net loss, right? I think the net gain is that we've never been able to put that power on display and kind of show its corruption in real time, right? And that's something that I think that may be like a greater gain, right? So I'm not sure I'm saying we may have taken some loss, right? There is some loss in something that happens in social media, right? But I think that social media technology, that whole kind of zeitgeist, right? I think that's actually maybe a necessary evil, as far as kind of like progress kind of goes.
Joe, when you say that social media, like, so I'm glad you brought up Emmett Till, because I watched HBO's Lovecraft Country, and one of the things that they did in Lovecraft Country was they brought Emmett Till alive, right? They showed what he was like as a young kid, and I thought they played his absence, how it affected other people, how we never think about that part of the story. I thought they did a wonderful job on that. But the reason I bring it up is because social media, which was the newspaper at the time, right? Like the mom decided to have an open casket. So with the Emmett Till situation, so she can show to the world what they did to her baby. Those are her words. But the reason it garnered so much attention was because of the pushback that America got from an international perspective because of the death of Emmett Till. Countries were calling ambassadors, recalling some of their ambassadors back, and there were tons of difficult questions America had to answer because of Emmett Till's open casket funeral. And while I agree with you that newspapers and traditional media is not viewed as social media, I mean it's the same concept, right? People get information, and I think social media and Facebook is problematic for how they choose what information people get, but the concept remains the same.
I think old school social media, I think the equivalent of that is probably like beauty shops and like church and like, like meeting in the street, right? Like that I think that's probably like old school social media, right? I think print media has always kind of, first of all, we have to think of print media in historical context, and not everyone has always been able to read print media. So there's always been a form of social interactive media, but I don't want to get too far away from the subject at hand.
I will agree, though. I think that the immediate reaction to live streaming it, like it happening immediately and everyone, that is a new take on it. Like watching someone die. I remember, I forget the name of the motorist who was shot and killed on Facebook Live, right? Like this now it's kind of sort of I forget that the TV show where that it's really like strange and odd things happen, and now reality kind of resembles that. And I think watching his murder and seeing everybody's immediate reaction to it definitely played a part in shaping the narrative and in how we feel about it, and I guess what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've lost all hope at this point.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Keisha, I think one interesting thing about social media as well, I think depending on what generation you were in, social media has a completely different impact. So like as a 22-year-old, I probably got Instagram when I was like 13 or so. And that has like been my thing. I know Keisha probably got it a little bit earlier since she's a little bit younger than me. But I'm curious just your thoughts on it as someone who kind of grew up in the middle of the social media era, rather.
I would say, from my perspective, social media started off as an outlet just to chat with friends. And then as I got older and further into the perception of things, it was my way of being knowledgeable about what's going on, because as a part of my generation, I'll be honest, we're not that in tune with watching the news. We don't wake up and watch the news or necessarily engage ourselves in pro news activities besides social media. So I would say, as an African American, seeing these things on social media, pro, because I'm able to keep in touch with what is going on, but anti, because as an African American, it instills fear in me. Should I be afraid when a police pulls me over? Or should I stop? Because now I have the fear of my people are being subjected to this type of violence, and we are brought up as if we should be on trial. So, I mean, it's informative, yet anti, because, I mean, should I live in fear based off of what I see?
I feel that. I think one of the biggest things that I'm concerned about, in addition to like the desensitization of Black death, I think in a lot of ways, social media allows us as Black people to relive the same traumatic cycles on and on. So I was 13 when Trayvon died, and up until the day George Zimmerman was found not guilty, I just assumed he would go to jail, right? Since then, we've seen multiple cases of similar circumstances. None of these police officers are going to jail. I believe the statistic is like 98, 99% of them involved in homicides don't end up facing any time. So I'm curious to hear your guys' perspective on the effect of having these huge like movements on social media that we agree are unjust. We agree that these things are wrong, but then when they get to the criminal justice system, they're not guilty. Like, what do you think that does to our spirit as Black people? That we can rally amongst causes, but then when it comes down to it, like, it didn't even really matter, you know? Not that I'm not at all to say that the deaths of these people does not matter, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
I think the same thing happens when you got like, I'm not gonna say you guys because I'm not gonna talk about young people like that. I love young people. I feel young. I feel young some days too, right? But I think like it's the same thing that happens when you guys go protest, but then you're like, oh, it's election day. I'm gonna go do anything else in the world except go vote, right? It's that disconnect from how the real world works that may sometimes distance us and you guys as well from the goals that you're trying to attain, right? So like I remember there were weeks around even like the George Floyd protests where like there were even some other people from the other side coming to the table wanting to like kind of wanting to do some things, right? But I'm not even
taking knees and shit. All that.
Right. Like, I mean, like the definite, like we take down flags in South Carolina and we call that change, right? And it's not, it's fabric, right? And so I think we have to move to a place where policy it doesn't have to replace protest, because I believe in protest 100%. But I think that as educated as our generation is becoming, and as our people are becoming, I think that we have to move to policy. And I think from policy comes power. I think protest is just display. It's just, I don't know. Andre got thoughts on that, and I want to hear.
I'm thinking about the original question and how the connection between what you like, the movements that we see and the outcomes, right? That's, I guess, the question, right? Like the outcomes are that justice, whatever that means, is not served, and what that means and how it translates is that us, and to Keisha's point, we don't feel that we are safe, that the system protects us or cares about us or incorporates us, right? Like, and my initial reaction, or I agree with the desensitized, like having become desensitized, and I think about some of my idols, right, and why they're my idols, and I just keep coming back to James Baldwin, right? Like he got up and he left America, right? He was just like, this place is it will make you believe a fantasy and live in an alternate reality. And so he got up and left. And when I was younger and I believed in change in a meaningful way, I engaged with the system and like fought and protested and tried to look for ways to change things. But as I'm getting older, I find myself leaning and wanting to be a James Baldwin, give up on this brokenness. That isn't to say that like I'm not going to go out and keep creating, because James Baldwin kept writing and kept doing wonderful things, but he didn't let the heaviness of America drag him down.
That's interesting.
Andre, can I just say that I think part of something that's tied into that is that people from both sides of the aisle profit off of the destruction of Black bodies. And I mean, like, some of them like profit politically off of it, right? And some of them profit off of just the continuation of you feeling like you are being under attack and you're being destroyed, right? So it's like that's always a net win for the people who like run for office and do those things, right? I think it is always traumatic for the people, but I think those same people that choose which ones we see, I think they know sometimes how they're gonna go. And I think they know they'd rather see it go badly so that we can get, and I know that sounds really terrible, but I want to say something earlier. We talked about the white guy, right? And if we had heard some of the underlying things that are coming out in the trial where George is kind of being put on trial, like if we had heard some of those things about what had happened leading up to that, I know a lot of folks that you talk to, Andre, they would have been like, I don't know, he probably deserved what he got. And I'm not saying that George did. I'm not saying that at all. I'm talking about those people and how they feel about law and order. I think they would have found what was happening to be like justifiable. And I think and I'm only saying this because I think we need to have real conversations about real, right? And I think not talking about how other people feel I'm glad we are having a conversation about how other people think about things, because I think that's actually how we do come to some sort of common ground. But I do think that's an irony, right?
Joe, to your point, I think it's systemic, right? So when you're saying it's this side or that side, right? It's, while I agree with you that people are using this for their own benefit, it is systemic. And that's where I think that the hopelessness comes from, is that recognizing that the system it protects itself. It operates to oppress, and like I don't feel as if I have the personal tools to dismantle the system. Now, that is to say that I think of a few great quotes here and a few things I'd like to share when I think about this situation, right? Shocked but not surprised. I read a lot of thought pieces around the times of George Floyd's death, and a lot of that was a narrative that kept coming up, is that Black people are shocked but not surprised, right? Because we keep waiting for that hopelessness feeling because we've experienced it for so long and so often. Another one is you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? Like that that's another tool. That's another quote that I think about and right. So when we're talking about justice and using the courts, that's the master's tools, right? And we're not going to use those to dismantle the master's house. And so these are some of the things that I think about and why I've ultimately, I think, am coming to the Baldwin approach of let me go to France, right? Because America, doesn't care. Like, shout out to Kanye. America does not care about Black people.
Yeah.
I would like to chime in and piggyback off something that Joe said about the policies. So my question to that will be this. We have law in place and we have these badges that are issued to these police officers that we entrust with the safety, correct? So at what point would those policies, that I would love to hear, at what point would those policies counteract, I would say, the shadow of which these officers hide behind that badge? Because it seems that the badge is a excuse for a reason to do this and to do that. So I would love to hear like an example of a policy that you think would be best to counteract those already lawmaking things that are in place.
Okay, so I was a criminal justice minor, so part of me wanted to kind of deconstruct the system by learning more about it and maybe even becoming a part of it, which I think is potentially a way to do that. But I think that Andre's right. Like I wanted to say something like it's like the system is actually not broken. I wanted to correct myself because it's actually working exactly how they intended. And the proof of that is how you feel, right? So I'm not sure I have the solutions for how you dismantle like this entire criminal, not even criminal justice. It's far wide, it's through almost every part of our lives, right? I'm not sure how we break that down, but I know with any big problem, it has to be taken on at scale. It has to be taken on like with only manageable parts, and we can only do what we can handle, right? So part of that is accountability, right? Everybody, you, Jalen, Andre, like we own a piece of that pie. And it's not just people that like us, it's like everybody in the sound of my voice, everybody that cares about justice owns a piece of that. And everybody that doesn't own a piece of that actually stands in the way of progress, right? And so I think once we take that ownership and have that accountability, I think we start to do something about violence, which is also a problem in our communities. But we also start to really fix and break down the power structures that are tearing us down, right? Because when we collect and we understand our organized power, when we use the power that we have to, like I just talked about earlier, and go vote, we can decide who's sheriff. We can decide who even judges are in some places, right? We can decide how some of these criminal justice things are playing out and preventing them from the beginning, right? Or from before they become problems, right? But I think we still have to keep holding the police accountable. So I still think we have to keep the pressure where it is. I still think you have to hold pressure on elected officials. But I think there's something that we have to do too. Like I think we can't zoom out after 4 weeks after George dies. I don't think we get to zoom out, right? It's not like, I don't think we get to do that. I think we constantly have to stay engaged because they are constantly engaged in our destruction. They don't take days off. And every day that we want to chill and, like whatever. I mean, I'm not saying not have a life, but I'm saying we constantly got to be woke. They are constantly on attack. So there's not a moment where we can't not be. I would say this is a war. If we're being destroyed, if our bodies are being destroyed, we're actually at war. And treating it as if we're not at war is the reason why we keep losing, right?
Definitely.
Well said.
So with that being said, we are almost reaching time, but kind of to Joe's point, he talked a lot about ownership, taking responsibility for our community. He also talked about people profiting off of Black death. I'm not sure if any of you have heard, but this week another piece of news was that Tamir Rice's mother, Samia Rice, I believe, made a comment directed to a few activists in the Black Lives Matter movement that, in short, I'll just take a quote from it, where she asked a lot of the people in the Black Lives Matter global network to step down, stand back, and stop monopolizing and capitalizing our fight for justice and human rights. As the mother of Tamir Rice, who I'm sure you guys have maybe seen on T-shirts, maybe seen on flyers, she has taken offense to the fact that so many people have profited off of her son's likeness, and very few of those people have given her or her family anything in return. I'm curious just for your overall thoughts on that and what you think our responsibility is as Black people to our people in this fight.
Our first thing that we have to do for ourselves is not let the people we're trying to like take power from co-opt our movement and making it into a branding strategy. That would probably be first. But secondly, I mean, it goes back to like, I mean, I think the local organization, there's like, I think it was like 30 BLM organizations underneath them that like wrote a letter to the overall staff. There's some other story that's connected to that too, where there's some dissent underneath as well. I mean, I think the people underneath have their heart in the right place, right? It's literally just like this, some large institution. Big surprise here. Is there not a trend here? Do we not get a trend here? There's millions of dollars. No, I don't know how much money flowing to that organization, right? Absolute power. I mean, they have absolute power over the Black liberation movement now, right? That, I mean, that kind of power corrupts. Like, I can't see how it doesn't. When we know that there are so many organizations out here trying to do the work, split across the country, and they're not even giving their own money that they're collecting from all over the world back to those same people on the ground. I bet Minneapolis BLM, I bet they have like nothing in their bank account. And I'm not trying to tear down BLM. I'm not anti-BLM. I believe Black Lives Matter ideologically. But I think there's something wrong when there is no trickle down in our world. Like those people at the ground who are doing the actual work, who are actually bringing these things to light and making sure that, you know, protests keep happening, like they deserve the actual resources, and they're being starved out.
Joe, to piggyback on your point and to add more levity to this, well, to add some levity to the situation, and some more recent news, the United Negro College Fund, you know, just elected their first ever Black chairman of the board, right? And that,
repeat that. Can you hold up? Just repeat that fact one more time, just for the audience.
So the United Negro College Fund has been providing funds for Black people to go to Black colleges since 1944. And recently, they just elected their first ever Black chairman of the board, right? Like, and so that is a relevant point in that I agree that we don't, the institutions and support systems that are designed to help and uplift Black people too often don't do a good enough job, or miss its demographic target, or other people benefit that, you know, off of the collective Black movements. So yeah, I thought that was, when I came across that recently, I was like, okay, that, you know, again, shocked but not surprised.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I mean, we see films all the time, and we know it to be true now, right? Where the FBI is, and we talked about it a little bit. Maceo talked about it a little bit on a Blue Talk episode before, so go check those out, right? But he talked a little bit about how the FBI like has, you know, infiltrated political organizations, and so I'm not saying they've been infiltrated. They probably have, right, on a high level, but I'm just not surprised that, like, I just, you know, at this point, it's like they're so big, they've collected so much money, and so little work goes into anything but profiting off of people that die, that I'm not seeing like how that's turned into policy. I've seen no sponsored legislation. I've seen no organizers on the ground.
Community centers.
I will say, Joe, this one was a little different in that there's been actual policy. They disbanded the police force that Chauvin was a part of. They've outlawed and banned chokeholds in a lot of jurisdictions. Even New York State banned the chokehold. So there's been some policy. Has it been? I thought. Has it gone far enough, or has it been radical enough in any meaningful way? No, but there has been some policy. Like they dismantled their police force. Like that's not nothing. Like they just was like, all right, the city council voted to end that police force. So there has been some stuff. Has it gone far enough? Not even close.
I feel like I don't know. Like I don't know. I don't mind police in my neighborhood. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't mind police in my neighborhood. I just want them to like protect me too.
Yeah,
I want them to think my life is as valuable as they think the people that they're actually protecting. I know that's probably a little delusional of me.
There's a whole series of conversations about how there are no good police officers, right? Like there's the bad apple or the good apple, that misnomer on what it means to be a police officer and to be a part of that system.
Yeah, Keisha, I saw you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, to quickly chime in, I would say the people that, based on the system, that are supposed to benefit from BLM movements or putting a deceased African American on your shirt, however the case may be, in many forms that they have been capitalizing off of these situations. I feel the people that it is meant for to profit from it, they are profiting. With the situation with the girl's mom, and she said she had, what have these people done for her, but they're capitalizing off of her child. I feel like it should not even exist in the first place. But here again, like as Joe said, we're dealing with a system that is not really broken. It's designed this way and it is working. So what is it, or shall I say, who is it that we can put in place to deter these things from happening? Just as if many people argue and say a woman can't teach her son how to be a man because she is not one. It's the same way. How can, well, as Andre highlighted, with them putting their first African American in that chair, that should have been taking place, in my opinion. Because how can we be governed by anyone else besides an African American? How can our people be governed if it's not by our people?
We've been governed by other people for a long time. I do think it's problematic, but I think I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm actually reading. I actually finished reading "Message to a Black Man" by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and one of the things he talks about is separation from white America. And he kind of, like to Keisha's point, mentions how we are being governed by white people. We are in a world or in a country where we are not equal to white people. Like we are not considered citizens in the same way that they are. So I think his answer would be that we truly do need our own institutions. We truly do need our own land, our own government, because as long as we are subject to white America, we will never receive the true freedom, justice, and equality that we feel like is due to us.
I disagree, but Andre?
I wanted to. I just think there's a full circle here. We're talking about Black exploitation, and you bring up Elijah Muhammad. And yeah. So I think it's very interesting. I was sitting in my. This was the same feeling that you have now. I brought this up the other day, and y'all gonna hate me for this. Y'all too really gonna hate me for this. But I was sitting. I took I've always taken women's studies courses, and I didn't let my last semester in law school be any different. So I took a gender equality law class, and in the class full of white people, I'm the only Black person in the class. I legit called Kobe Bryant a rapist, right? Because and my professor was shocked. She was shocked that a Black person would say that about another Black person, right? And I think there's the same vein here about Elijah Muhammad, right? That he, had a bevy of 17-year-old girls that he, was teaching the ways to. So when we talk about Black exploitation, we gotta be careful about who we praise.
That's interesting. I think that I agree with that. I think that sometimes I at least feel like I think sometimes we get distracted on who the message is coming from rather than the message itself.
Yeah,
And
so we can all be flawed messengers, and Jesus of Nazareth has taught us that if it has anyone, that yes, you can separate the message from the messenger. It's just real hard to do it.
That's a really good point. That's a very, very good point. I would
say though. Wait, you go ahead.
No, you got it.
Okay, I would say actually in my black drama class, we've actually watched a film, A Day of Absence, and that was absence of black people for a whole day. So I would say it's kind of ironic to praise us for feeling like you need us. What would a day without a black person be like? Who would you pick on then? Who would be on the t-shirt then? You have to ask yourself that question at some point. So for it to not be a leading,
we disappeared.
I didn't hear you.
I said they would throw a party if we disappeared.
Absolutely, but I mean, then it's kind of contradictory in a way to say that if we disappeared, certain things wouldn't be done. You wouldn't have certain people to do such and such, quote unquote, to piggyback off of a day of absence. But then you're slowly just killing us off and finding other reasons to put it on. So
I don't think their objective is to kill us off. I think they need us in their calculations for this social experiment. So I think the point is probably social control, but I think the overarching goal is not necessarily like our complete destruction. I think they do see profit in what we bring to this capitalist machine.
Joe, I just wanted, there's one point, and then I'm like going to be completely done, that I wanted to bring up, and I thought I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the Asian hate and some of the violence against Asians in America currently. I just saw this video in New York City of this guy just like completely beat this dude up on a train, right? And I thought we would be remiss, and I would not be doing my community a service if I didn't talk about some of the ways that I think America right now is treating people of Asian descent and the violence against Asians for, a president for 2-3 years calling something a China virus, where, it baffles science because viruses don't come, or they don't have nationalities. They don't come from ethnicities. And the violence, black people in general need to do better than how other people do. And we need to stand up and speak and say, and point a finger and say, that's wrong. And y'all need to stop treating Asian people this way. Y'all need to stop being violent towards Asian people.
Yeah, like I don't know who need to hear this, but like I'll pop anybody in their mouth over Asian, like any of my Asian friends, like anytime. Like I don't know who need to hear that. Like no, but really, no, I think that there is a problem with our community standing up for any other marginalized community. And I think that may have something to do with how much Black folks have been abused. Like I'm a gay Black man, right? And so like I know what it's like to kind of be marginalized from two different places. And so like sometimes it's really hard for me to speak. It's for years, not maybe more so now, but it was hard for me to speak on like Black liberation type things because I felt so demonized by a large part of Black culture for being gay. So I think that we have to be honest about the fact that we can hate people too, or we can not think that other people's lives are valuable. And so like we need to kind of reconcile that as well in order for us to be empowered to protect other people who are suffering injustice.
Joe, who I think does a really good job of bringing that to the forefront? Chappelle. I think Dave Chappelle has done a really good job of talking about that balance, about the oppressions that we as Black people have felt and the way that we marginalize other oppressed peoples. I thought, while I disagree with Chappelle, and I thought about he made a joke about the LGBTQ car, and I thought, most things I agree with Chappelle on, but I think while I disagree with him, and I think that's natural, I think he does a very good job of talking about that specific topic, about how Black people feel towards other marginalized groups, how we feel like they're not marginalized. They don't got our 400 years of slavery and oppression and Jim Crow, so they shouldn't really be complaining, right? Like I think Dave Chappelle's, while I disagree with his point, I think he does a really good job of bringing it to the forefront of the conversation.
I think about Latin American immigrants and our kind of not our kind of blasé attitude towards immigration. And even some people's outright, I've heard some Black people even say like, I need them to fix Black America before we start, opening doors, right? And with just completely an ass backwards way to think about life, right? But I also understand where that comes from too. So I don't know. That's in the same stroke. Like we gotta do better, I think, period.
I think the key, and we are at time, so we do have to wrap up, even though it's a great conversation. I think a lot of it really just comes down to knowing your history. You spoke earlier about framing, Andre, when we were talking about the Chauvin trial and the George Floyd murder. But I think when we hear things like the recent rise in anti-Asian sentiment, I think that is a fallacy considering the history of this country. Like if you went down 300 years ago, there
Chinese Exclusion Act
amounts of anti-Chinese, anti-Asian sentiment. There were
years they interned Japanese people.
Yeah, American in the
railroads.
Yeah, So I think that for everyone watching this, I encourage you to look into the history of oppression, not just of your people, but of the global Black nations of the earth. And I think if you do that, you'll have a much better context for not only what's happening to them, but what's happening to you. Because I think one thing we also sometimes tend to do is isolate our struggles and see it in a vacuum. And I think the more that we can see our struggles as a collective struggle that's happening globally, instead of a civil struggle that's happening here, I think that's how we start to make the political and policy inroads that could really make a change. But with that being said, we spoke about a lot today. I'm going to let each of you just have a 30 seconds for closing thoughts. My closing thoughts, considering we spoke about profiting and monopolizing off of Black death, I just want to pay respects to the family and loved ones of George Floyd and all of my Black brothers and sisters who have been killed at the hands of police, at the hands of any type of violence. I pray for you, and I hope that you find peace and refuge in what you're going through.
I just want to share a Buddhist quote, and it's something that I kind of sort of put at the forefront of how I live my life. It says, "Be kind, for everyone carries a heavy burden." Right? You never know what someone's going through and what they've been through. So it just to be kind.
I would like to send my condolences to George Floyd's family as well. And I would leave the quote with, as African Americans and so many more ethnicities, sometimes in life, you have to learn that in order for life to get better for you, you have to accept an apology that you never got. So sometimes once you move up that ladder and you find reasoning beyond what's on the preface of everything, you have to just dig a little deeper and understand what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes.
Yeah. I would just say that, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. So stay in love, stay in peace, and stay in power.
Definitely. Thank you guys so much for each of my moderators. This was a super dope discussion. I feel like this is getting better every week. Thank you so much for Blue Star for giving us the open space and the platform to discuss topics we care about. And we look forward to seeing you guys again in 2 weeks to discuss our next topic. Looking forward to it. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Have a good week and be safe.
Have a good night.
Heard you to the it first, I could do it better. If we talking bands, got a new vendetta. They don't want me in, they gon' have to let us. They gon' try to rock when it's Armageddon. They gon' take a lot when they hear the message. And they gon' wanna drop when they hear the sessions. I feel like I'm a god when I'm in your presence. I feel like I'm on top, I feel like I had it. City only rock that Givenchy. Got a new white bag and it coming full speed. And they see me at the top, now they really like me. Gotta move like that when you're real icy. Cause it's way less friends than the haters. Way less hands when